Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think we're live, and it's lovely to see so many of you joining us right from the start. Thank you very much. Let's just do some introductions. So my name's Simon Blanchard. I'm your host today, and I'm also co-owner at Data Protection Network Associates. As some of you may know, just a little introduction about DPN, and we've got two main purposes. First of all, from resources point of view, we produce practical industry guidance, topical articles, which many of you may be familiar with, hopefully. That's produced on our website, which is dpnetwork.org.uk. And we run various events like this on all sorts of different topics relating to data protection and privacy. But in addition to that, we're also a specialist data protection consultancy and training provider as well. We work with a large number of organisations, from small to medium-sized businesses and charities up to large multinationals, from a wide range of different business sectors. We support them to build and enhance their data protection programs and to handle subject access requests, tackle any emerging risks, things like that. So that's enough about us. I'm just going to quickly pop some introduction slides just on the screen for the moment. There we go. Hopefully you can see that. So today's topic is ChatDPO, as we've called it. So a real life data protection chat on the current trends, topics and trends. So the next hour, what we're aiming to cover for you is really a catch up on recent data protection related news, guidance, and also enforcement action as well. And I guess we'll spend a fair bit of time actually on DPO, the Data Use and Access Act. We'll talk about key changes on the horizon as well, coming up in 2026 and potentially further ahead as well. And we'll discuss some ongoing challenges as well for DPOs and other with data protection duties as well. So we are recording this session. So if you'd like to watch it again, or if you'd like to, receive a copy of the video, you'll get that around about this time tomorrow as well. So if you're UK based, around about 4 p.m. tomorrow. So you can watch it again or potentially share it with colleagues. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by our panel. Just going to pop that slide on so you can see our panel today. Yeah, delighted to be joined by our very knowledgeable speakers that we've got here with us. So first of all, a familiar face to our regular viewers. That's Robert Bond, who's Senior Counsel at Privacy Partnership Law and outsourced DPO in the technology and charity sectors. Robert, would you like to just say a few words to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Simon. Thanks for inviting me to take part. I'm looking forward to it. So yes, I'm with Privacy Partnership Law. I'm also a commissioner at the Data and Marketing Commission. So we, with the DMA, have been involved with a lot of the aspects around cookies and charity soft opt-in and so on with the ICO. And I am an external DPO for a number of organisations. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Robert. Thanks. And it's great to have you on the panel again. Wonderful. Sofia Carroll. Sofia's DPO for a technology company with GDPR roles in the charity sector and experience at the ICO as well. So, Sofia, would you maybe say a few words?
Yes. Hi. Thanks, Simon. Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Sofia. I'm currently a data protection officer for a company called MSite, officially InfoBreak, but we trade as MSite. And we operate in the construction sector. So all our clients are construction companies, and we help them with the health and safety and digital workforce management, mainly by providing a biometric solution for them, because it's a high risk and, as you probably know, very regulated sector. As Simon said, I was previously a lead case officer at the Information Commissioner's Office, and I was in the data protection team of the RSPCA as well, and I've had other legal and data protection jobs in the meantime.
Wonderful to have you with us today. That's great. Thank you very much for joining us. So last but not least, I'd like to introduce you to Stephen McCartney, who's an independent consultant with previous DPO roles in edtech and fintech. So, Stephen.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to work for two regulators for data protection, the European Data Protection Supervisor, and also the Information Commissioner's Office as was. So I'm going to make the mistake of referring to it as the ICO lots today, when it's really the IC. But I've also worked for Google, fintechs, edtechs, and then Royal Mail. So it's been a rich and varied career so far, and I'm getting far too old for this.
Not at all, Stephen. Great. Lovely to have you with us. I'm just going to stop those slides for the moment, bring us all back onto the screen. Okay, so I think it's time to kick off with some of the questions. But before we do that, we've got a poll to just start us off with. Actually, we'd like to do a quick audience poll. So I'm just going to pop this on the screen so that you can all see it. So here we go. So the question here that you should all be able to see now, hopefully, is what's the impact on your organisation of the changes that are ushered in by the Data Use and Access Act 2025? So already diving in quickly, thank you. It's just good to see what your reaction to this is, whether you consider them to be very beneficial in part, if you're neutral to it, or maybe negative even. So just waiting while those scores settle now. I think we're just about there. Okay, great. I'm going to pause it there then. So the end result that we've got is 3% saying that it's very beneficial. We've got 41 saying beneficial in part, 54% that are neutral, and 1% that are negative. Okay, so we've got a bit of a balance there, but primarily in the middle, they're beneficial in part, neutral to it, rather than very beneficial or negative. So with that in mind, if we go on kind of the first area, obviously around DUA, are the changes to the Act as scary as some would have us believe, Robert? That's one of the questions that we had from our audience. So I'd like to ask that to you first, Robert, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, thank you for that. We have to remember that the DUA Act makes some changes to our Data Protection Act 2018 and the GDPR in the UK. I don't know, as I've started to look at the practicalities of the data protection changes, in the main, I don't see them as scary. In fact, in the main, I see some of them as extremely valuable. What I think and I may talk about this later, what I think we need to be aware of is that the DUA Act is not just about changes to data protection. There are the other sections on codes of conduct and verification schemes and so on and so forth. And smart data. I think the data portability rights that we've not really seen much use of are going to be more important as people realize they have a right to port their data, just as much as government says we've got a right to look at and use your data too. So I don't think it's that scary, but I do think that it will impact on businesses of all sizes.
Great. I tend to agree with you, Robert. Absolutely. Stephen, was there anything you wanted to add to this one?
No, I think everything that Robert says there is very, very correct. The one thing I would say to those of you who are being bombarded with the "Are you ready for it?" I would just say that this happens every single time there is a tweak to the law. Data protection loves an apocalypse. Don't believe everything you read on LinkedIn. Keep calm and carry on.
Very wise words. Thank you. That's great. I'd actually quite like to ask each of the panel actually what your thoughts are on what's probably one of the most, for you, the most significant change. Sophia, let's ask you first. What do you think is the most significant?
Yes, thank you. So for me, I think it's the changes on automated decision making, because now you can kind of, prohibition's kind of flipped, and you can use that on personal data. So there'll be with safeguards, but the fact that you can use them more freely means probably more opportunities for the development team, but also, and maybe opportunities for people as well. But it will, I think, highlight the fact that companies will have to explain better what they're doing with algorithms, and people will have to make an effort to probably understand what they're saying. So, special category remains as a, don't go there, but I think the change that you can use it on personal data is definitely will have an impact with AI features.
It could be quite a game changer, couldn't it, really? I think for some organisations. That's good. Great. Robert?
So for me, it's the changes to DSARs and the fact that search is now, in fact, it's backdated, as you know, to January 2024, which is interesting. Searches need only be reasonable and proportionate. And of course, you can ask the data subject to help you identify precisely what data they're looking for. And the clock stops. That 1 month stops until you've reasonably been satisfied. So I think I'm seeing that being used quite a lot now with particularly aggressive weaponized DSARs.
I think that's very much helped because quite a lot of it was kind of guidance that organisations were maybe following, but it's put that now into law, hasn't it? So it's very clear for everyone that these are the ground rules that we can all follow when responding to a subject access request. Right. Stephen.
I mean, it's a bit boring and technical, but I actually am hopeful, maybe I'm too much of an optimist, that the changes to how the Information Commission is now structured might lead to more accountability for the chief executive, who previously was the commissioner. They'll have people who are knowledgeable looking over their shoulder and more regular reporting to them. And I'm hoping that will lead to a more effective regulator, because I think that's one of the things that perhaps is holding data protection back here.
Interesting. Great. Thank you, Stephen. That's great. I'm going to come back to you actually for the next question, if that's okay, Stephen. And that's really, we've had a question from the audience about the charitable purposes soft opt-in, which is, I think, a theme that many others will pick up on as well. In terms of how that can be applied in real life situations by charities.
I think it's going to be very, very tough. I cannot imagine that when the government decided to make charity marketing easier and allow charities to use the soft opt-in, that this is the result that they envisaged would make the life of charities easier. The fact that the ICO, it seems to be suggesting 2 separate soft opt-ins, one for selling stuff and one for propagating charitable aims, it's going to become very unworkable very quickly. And because naturally people like to not get marketing or don't bother reading the statements. And I think it's going to be tough for the charitable sector to implement this in a way that really moves the needle for them on their marketing and what they get out of it.
Okay, do you think, just to kind of pick up on that though, so for charities, for example, that are really primarily serving their charitable purposes, that maybe don't have a shop, for example, or don't have other kind of commercial purposes, do you think there might be maybe some benefits in for those? Or
I think there will be for those, but a lot of charities do a little bit of both. Yeah. And certainly the bigger charities are going to not get much out of this. So maybe it's the thing that for smaller charities that don't have a commercial wing, it's going to be something that they can actually make a lot of use of. For a lot of the larger charities and people that I know that are working in larger charities, they don't see this as use or ornament at all for them. So you're right, there may be a bit of a benefit for smaller charities who are just trying to get their message out there. But for anybody a bit bigger, it's going to be a struggle.
Okay, right, thank you. Sofia, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yes, I agree with Stephen, because it's one thing having the option, which is I think generally a win. But how are you if you're in the fundraising team or in the data protection team advising the fundraising team, how are you going to explain this to the people? Because if you decide to use it, there's almost like a cut-off point where the soft opt-in for charity applies. So what are you going to do? How are you going to divide the people, in the groups? Because, you have to remember that some people will have consented or not consented according to the old rules. So basically, can your CRM support this separation, especially if you have the commercial soft opt-in, then there's like another group of people. So you're going to have to pass that on to the teams in a way they can understand and not get confused. And that could be an additional hurdle if you like, because you're going to have to explain what the soft opt-in means to begin with, and that it doesn't just come with a free for all sign up and start emailing people.
That's a good point. And there's that internal communication, as you say, the CRM system, setting that up, and then all your campaign selections at the same time and being clear which you're using there. Okay, so that's a good point. And we did actually have a specific, and I should mention, I did miss out one little thing, by the way, but I see lots of you are already using the chat. But for anyone that's not found that yet, please feel free to add any questions in, and also a big thank you to anyone that submitted questions in advance. You'll see that I'm picking up some questions that were that some people gave when they registered, so that's also been really useful. But yeah, feel free to drop a question into the chat as well if you wish, or respond to others. That often happens. Some people respond in the chat too, so thank you for that. But we had a specific question that I had going to pass on to Stephen, if that's okay. So currently the ICO draft guidance says that soft opt-in can be used for new people. It's used for new people, but we've got the scenario, of course, where you may have been in contact already with an individual. So you might have somebody that reconnects and comes back to a charity. Can we use the soft opt-in as kind of like a fresh expression of their wishes in that case? Will that maybe override what indication of consent or an opt-out we had before? What's your thoughts on that?
Yes, you can, but you need to make sure you're following the rules for the soft opt-in. So it would be, in the course of a sale or negotiation, or if somebody's expressing an interest, visiting your website, interested in what your charity does and its beliefs and its aims, at the time the data is collected, and a reasonable opt-out given at that time, and an ability to opt out at that time. I have seen somebody go, well, what if they just send you like an email? Would that override it? The answer is definitely no. So yes, whatever the last point where somebody gets to express a wish on their marketing preferences would traditionally be absolutely valid, even if you're moving from consent to soft opt-in. Just make sure you are obeying the rules of the soft opt-in to the letter, because the one thing that you can say about marketing, and the reason why the ICO, a lot of the ICO's enforcement is based around marketing, is because it's technical breaches. So it's a lot easier for them to prove, to take action. They don't have to argue principles or anything like that. It's very clear whether there's a breach or not. And of course, the changes to data protection law also mean changes to PECR. And we were just discussing before this, it also means that fines for breaches of PECR will, of course, equal the same level of fines under UK GDPR at the moment. So there's a massive upscaling of fines potentially for marketing breaches. A lot of marketers will assume, well, we were always on 4% anyway. So, but the actual consequences of getting it wrong are far greater. So the answer is yes. You can look at whatever the last expression of wishes that they were presented with, and the choice they made is valid. Just make sure you're doing it right.
That's a good point, and thanks for mentioning the PECR fines as well. That's a great point, just to make sure everyone's aware of. Thank you. And just a little caveat, just for everyone, just a reminder that the ICO's guidance is not yet finalised on the soft opt-in. We're still dealing with the draft guidance, so that's something else you might want to build into your decision making as well. So shall we move on to the recognised legitimate interests? So you may be aware that there are 5 new conditions that are set out for recognised legitimate interest. So it's a new lawful basis that we'll have. So the first one being disclosure of personal data for a public task. That's the first one. Second one is to safeguard national security or public security or for defence reasons. Second one, to respond to or to deal with an emergency situation. Then to prevent or detect or investigate crime is the fourth one. And the last one is to protect the physical, mental or emotional well-being of people, which is called the safeguarding condition. So those are kind of the new conditions that we have as a recognised legitimate interest. So the question that we've had for Sofia, if that's okay, is does having a recognised legitimate interest really does it disoblige the controller from having to undertake the balancing test that we would normally do for a legitimate interest?
Yes, thank you. So because it's now, recognized, I'll quote it, the balancing test is removed, but we still have to think about necessity. So a part of that obligation is eased, I'll say, and maybe there's a question there for all these legitimate interests that you listed, Simon. Would anyone really argue that they're not legitimate? So did they have to make it to the list? But they're there now. So we still we still have to think about the other data protection principles and, make the necessity test, which might change the answer to, is it really okay, and how much data we're going to give, because there's still, you still have to think about data minimization and the other principles. But strictly speaking, the answer is, yes, some of the balancing tests you don't need to do, because now Parliament's done it for you in a way by putting it in that section.
Yeah, just that first bit, as you said, making sure that it's necessary. Exactly. Yeah, good point. Yeah. Thank you. And Robert, was there anything you wanted to add to that about recognise legitimate interests?
So Sophia's covered it really well. I think the only thing that I would suggest is that, and Sophia's touched on this, is that you would still, as an organisation, need to consider risks, full stop. So how long are you keeping the data? Is it proportionate? What happens if things go wrong? I still think, in the world we live in, it would be prudent to at least have something that says you consider the risks when relying on recognised legitimate interests, just in case something goes wrong and there's a complaint, etc.
I think that's a really good point, especially in a situation where you're for example, a prevention or detection of investigation of crime, for example. There could still be risks involved in that. So yeah, I think that's a good call. And also a reminder that you'd also need to update your records of processing as well to reflect the fact that you're using a different lawful basis, because recognised legitimate interest is regarded as a separate lawful basis. It's now a seventh lawful basis that we have as well. So that's something to maybe consider. So if we can just touch back to marketing, actually, maybe we should put this up after the soft opt-in, but let's just return to that, because we did have a question actually from somebody submitted in advance. So, and I'm going to read it word for word. So I understand legitimate interest is a valid legal basis for email marketing in some circumstances, for instance, selling concert tickets. Is this true?
Okay, the concert tickets piece is irrelevant to whether or not you can use legitimate interests for direct marketing or not. There isn't a concert tickets carve out under the law. What I would say is that using legitimate interests as a condition for direct marketing isn't actually new to UK data protection law. Anyone who sent mail marketing or did telephone marketing before the changes that have come in recently could already rely on legitimate interests, even under the old 1998 Act for the oldies out there. And while EU GDPR had direct applicability to the UK before we left in 2021, Recital 47, which had direct applicability to the UK before 2021, actually called out explicitly that legitimate interest was a valid condition for processing for direct marketing. Now, what it doesn't do is invalidate PECR and the specific marketing rules for specific marketing channels that are laid out in PECR. So particularly for electronic marketing and the dropping of cookies that aren't caught by the slightly looser cookie rules, you are still going to need to rely on consent in the main or legitimate interest if you're using the soft opt-in. So really, nothing actually changes very much, except we have restored something which was implied before 2018 on the statute books between 2018 and 2021 and disappeared after we left the EU. All we're doing is restoring it to be explicit in the law that actually, as long as PECR allows it, you can rely on legitimate interest for the purposes of direct marketing.
Beautifully explained. Thank you very much, Stephen. That's really helpful. And you touched on cookies, actually. You mentioned, so it seems a logical place for us to go next, I think, in our discussion, is that some of our viewers have shown an interest actually in the exceptions to cookie consent that have been added under DUA. So there's 4 new exceptions, kind of alongside the existing strictly necessary cookies exception that we already have. So Robert, I'm just I'd like to come to you on this one, if it's okay. So do you think that the new exceptions that we have from the need to, to gain consent for cookies, are they useful in practice? Do you think they've got much applicability?
It will depend on the type of organization you are and the technology you're using. I think it's useful that we're sort of going back to recognizing that technology that assists with the functionality of the website, that is cookies there for emergency scenarios and so on, don't necessarily need consent, but you've still got to be transparent about what you are using. You've still got to work with your internal team to make sure that they are doing what you say you are doing. And in practice, I still find that there are so many challenges with cookie and cookie style technology. I think for an organization that simply has a business-facing app or website that is not doing any significant analytics, yes, it may simplify the language that you need to have, it may reduce the pop-ups, etc. But the bottom line is we are pretty much all using sophisticated technology, and we are tracking. And I still think we're going to have transparent language. We're going to have to show that we are accountable.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Robert. And I think that's a good point that you've raised. Is part of the challenge that we have around cookies is organisations being clear and transparent enough about the cookies. And equally, I think something, if I can just add, that you mentioned before, is about whether organisations are dropping cookies at the right time, and how well are they actually managing that through their consent platforms. I don't know if Sofia and Stephen, if you wanted to add anything around your experience of cookies here.
I was just going to add that if you have an EU audience, then obviously that's not applicable at all. So you will have to, well, obviously it's a risk decision, but if you want it to be really squeaky clean, then you would have to ask for consent anyway. So you might as well ask for consent anyway for the UK equivalent as well. So that kind of defeats the whole point.
It does. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's good to have covered it. Thank you. Thanks for that. Stephen, did you want to add anything else, or should we?
I mean, just the cynical old man that I am, my experience has been that UK PLC has not been meeting the previous standard of cookies, and the changes are a small baby step towards what would be seen as custom and practice in marketing teams and website teams across UK PLC today.
Yeah. Okay. Good point. Thank you. Shall we move on to the area of complaints then, in that case, which I think is one of the more meatier subjects that we've got when we talk about DPO. So one of the most significant change areas is around the requirement for a procedure kind of in-house in terms of dealing with data protection related complaints. So Sofia, I'm just interested in your thoughts on this one. Do you think it's really the ICO pushing away complaints, or is there more to it than that?
So I'll just say firstly that I left that department a few years ago, but
sorry to ask.
Yes. So it's for me, that wasn't a big change, because it was just standard practice that unless the controller has had the chance to say something, then you're not even looking at the complaint. All you do is say, go speak to the controller. And now I know this is frustrating for all sides, including the case officer point of view. In a way, yes, I can see, yes, it is pushing them away, because I know that people want to have an answer from the ICO, which they're not getting. But if you're just sat there looking at one side of the complaint, then you're not doing much. You don't know what's happening. And what will happen is the case officer will still go and say to the controller, what did you do? And now I know there's criticism about this as well. It's just, really making it simple. So it is a way to push away complaints, but I also think it's a fair point to say, well, I need to see, have they done anything at all? Otherwise, what are you doing? You're just hearing one side. Whatever the controller does or does not do, or decides that they'll just send an email and that's everything, that's another topic.
Yeah, exactly. And there's this requirement then to create a process or procedure in-house to manage that. What were your thoughts on that, Stephen, in terms of you see that as an additional obligation then for some organisations? Or
I mean, yes and no. A lot of organizations that are regulated already in another way, in another area, will have obligations to have a complaints process in place. And comparing what the information commissioners first stab at this looks like compared to, for example, financial services organizations, it's actually quite a loose process requirement. And you reply within 30 days, as soon as you can, give them a response, that kind of thing. And we actually, before, we had already, in the last place I worked, and I know some of my former colleagues are on today, so hello to them, we had already integrated our obligations under the Financial Ombudsman Service and the FCA to have a complaints process that was quite tightly regulated and had tighter timescales. We'd already integrated our data protection complaints process with that. And my advice is to do that where you can and where practicable, because it means that if complaints come in, if you're regulated in another area, such as financial services, they aren't going to parse complaints between did you meet your data protection one and did you not? They're just going, did you deal with this complaint in line with our obligations? So I would encourage people here in an area such as, financial services or pharmaceuticals or whatever, where a complaints process is needed, try as best you can to integrate that. There will be bumps in the road with it. We had them whenever I was there. I'm sure my old colleagues are giggling now as they listen. But, it can and does work.
Great. That's useful. Thank you very much.
Simon, do we have a second to pick up a question there, which I think is relevant? Someone said who should look at the SAR complaints when they come after, there's already been something going on, which I think is a fair point, because on the one hand, you kind of, dealing with someone who's already angry and probably doesn't want to speak to you. If you talk about the requester and then it's the, DPO requester. I guess it's a hard question. I think it's a bit of an omission that the law didn't address it, or the ICO hasn't addressed it. You might want to think about how big your team is. So, for example, if you've had an advisor dealing with it, then you escalate it to the DPO. If the DPO's dealt with it already, then it's up to you how much independence you want to argue for. Because if the DPO looks at it again, there's a bit of a feeling like, well, I've done everything I can for you from a data protection perspective. So you might want to send them. Again, depending on what the organization is, do you want to send them to customer service? Do you want to send them to an external organization? There's a lot of ifs and facts there to consider on a case by case, but it is just think a bit more broadly, I'd say.
We approached that, and I'll be very brief because I know we have very little time. Certainly in the last place I worked, we approached that by where it was a matter of whether people had received what they should have received by law. We kept it within the data protection team and had them make that determination. But whereas, let's say, for example, a complaint that, your DPO's rubbish and he doesn't know what he's talking about, we actually let our complaints function, our FCA complaints function handle that. And so there is some mileage to be garnered between having people looking over the shoulder of the data protection team on kind of the nuts and bolts of what you do. Were you polite? Were you good? Did you provide a good answer? But you making sure you keep your authority on actual, was the law applied correctly?
That's a good point. But I don't know if you saw the question that just came in actually just a few moments ago, Stephen. But we had not a question actually, but a comment that came in. It says, I'm a DPO and the complaints lead as well, so I'll have to wear two hats if a complaint comes in. So it's interesting your thoughts on that one. If you've got a separation, obviously that's ideal, but I guess it's more of a challenge if you're both the DPO and the person that leads on complaints too in that organisation. So in terms of how organisations go about putting in place, if they don't already have procedure for complaints, are there any tips and things that you could give, Robert?
Yeah, sure. You need to think about how people will make the complaints, and you need to anticipate that some people will be making a telephone call, some will be emailing, some will be texting. You need to work out how do we practically get people to make the complaint, and who does it go to? It may be that you have a chat bot that can be engaged with, provided that there is human intervention after that. You don't need to have a separate tool for receiving complaints so long as you can meet your obligations. So you, as Stephen has said, may already have a complaints tool for your other regulatory requirements, and so you could adapt it. What I think is important, given that the deadline is approaching in June, we need to anticipate that in the same way as people will use DSARs to make life hell, they will use this process to do something similar. We need to make sure that the business knows what a complaint looks like, that it is responded to within the 30 days, because there doesn't appear to be an exception to that, and that once you've acknowledged the complaint, there is an internal process as to how you manage it. We need to update our privacy notices, because the average privacy notice tends to focus on you have a right to complain to the ICO, but not you have a right to complain to us, and this is the process. We need to update any of our other policies to handle this. And I am sure that there will be individuals that will weaponize this. And if it goes into the too hard tray, you've missed your 30-day deadline, and somebody is going to make life hell.
That could always happen, unfortunately, couldn't it? I guess is that we have got that danger. Sorry, there's a little bit of noise on the line. Apologies if you can hear that. I can hear. Can you guys hear it?
Yeah, but it stopped.
It's stopped now. Wonderful. That's great. That we could have that danger of, I guess, complaints process becoming weaponized, a bit like maybe some DSARs, which rolls us nicely actually onto to talk about DSARs, data subject access requests. And in fact, we've got a few questions I think coming in there, but we'd like to do a little poll before we talk about this, if that's okay. So I'm just going to pop that on screen now for everyone. So is your organization seeing a rise in the number of data subject access requests? So here we go. We've got so far about 2% saying no, we've seen a decrease. 30 something, it's just balancing. 34, 35 maybe saying no, about the same. I'm just going to end the poll now, if that's okay. I think we've just about got all the answers in. Okay. There we go. So 2% saying no, we've seen a decrease in the number of subject access requests. 38% saying no, we've got around about the same sort of volume. So 25% saying yes, a slight increase, but worryingly, I guess, 32% saying yes, we're seeing a significant increase in the number. So quite a lot there in that higher band that are seeing either a slight or a significant, and obviously a reasonable proportion as well. In fact, the highest proportion saying no, about the same. But very few that are seeing a decrease. And I think that probably matches a number of our experiences as well, to be fair. So we've got one more, actually. I'd just like to pop another question, because there's one thing about the volume, but are we seeing an increase in the complexity as well? Again, we'll do this one quickly, if that's okay. Let's just pop that on the screen. Are you finding that the DSARs that you're receiving are increasingly complex and time-consuming to fulfill? It started out with 100% just then.
Clear that one.
Maybe it was just one person then, but it has balanced out a little bit now. Okay, we're just about at the level now, I think. Thank you. I'm just going to stop there. So we've ended up with, sorry I'm doing these quite quick, it's just in the interest of time so that we can get through all the questions. So we're finding that 50% are saying yes, that there is an increase in complexity and time, 29% saying that in part, so maybe some of those are more complex, and 20% saying no. So again, interesting. We're finding generally quite a lot of you are finding that they're taking more time and becoming more complex, which again, I think I'd certainly have a similar experience. So I don't know what your thoughts are too, but so Robert, is there any thoughts that you'd have on that? So it's interesting to see these kind of poll responses. Do they kind of correlate with what you're seeing?
Yes. I mean, I'm actually surprised that there aren't more people saying it's increasing, because that's what I'm seeing with some of my clients, particularly in the last few months, where clearly AI is being used to generate the DSAR. Mm-hmm. And if somebody says, I want to know what you've got about me, and you've got to search manually, technically, on other devices, it's pretty scary when you do respond to the DSAR and ChatGPT immediately creates a fight back. So I think the use of AI is making this, for the weaponized DSARs, certainly an easier target. I do think in practice, as we have so much data in so many formats in an organization, that is part of the challenge, is where is everything? And do we have the right tools to search for the data? Do we understand the exemptions that are available for when we don't disclose? I'm finding in one charity that I'm the external DPO for, we're seeing a significant increase, and we've almost got a person that is doing nothing but responding to DSARs, and they're coming in from all sorts of areas: former volunteers, caseworkers, employees, etc. So it's a problem that isn't going away. As I said at the start, I think it is useful that we may be able to ask the individual to be more specific as to what they're looking for and use that to buy ourselves more time. But it's still time consuming. And as I think Sofia said, nobody ever makes one of these when they're a happy person. And part of the challenge is trying to take the heat out of the situation. So again, if you can reach out to an individual and try to get to the bottom of what the issue is, why not have a process that does that, which takes us back to what we were talking about in terms of complaints, period.
It does. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I've just been looking at the chat as well while you've been speaking, Robert, and I think quite a few people are kind of agreeing with some of the aspects that you've touched on there. So more requests for metadata, more requests that are relating to an AI request, maybe again where there's a response via AI as well. So things like that coming up in the chat too. One thing I just wanted to touch on though, and I didn't ask in my original question there, was in terms of where Dua's sitting here. You mentioned, I think, in your introduction, Robert, that was one of the key things for you was around DSARs. But do you think Dua's gone far enough with their changes around DSARs, or in fact confirmation, I guess, of how we're responding to DSARs, or do you think maybe Dua could have gone a bit further, perhaps?
I think it would have been useful if we could have had more confirmation as, for example, what reasonable and proportionate means in terms of searches. It would be useful for controllers to have clarity about when you can refuse to deal with a DSAR because it is clearly an abuse of the law. I mean, I have to say personally, I've had a number of instances where DSARs are being used by defamation lawyers, and rights of erasure are being used by those lawyers to get rid of somebody who is better remembered. And the ICO's team have been quite commercially minded about how one practically deals with that. But Dua hasn't particularly helped in that sense.
Okay, that's useful to hear. Thank you for that. And just picking up on that, you mentioned reasonable and proportionate searches, and I see it's popped up in the chat as well. Brian's mentioned in the chat too. But it'd be useful to kind of try and give a little bit of clarity around that, particularly where reasonable, proportionate. Where does that fit when we're also dealing with searches that involve things like unstructured data, like email or Teams messages and things like that? Stephen, did you want an enviable task of answering that one?
All I can do is reflect back on you that it would be nice to have some guidance and idea of what reasonable and proportionate meant. In preparation for today, I went and I read the ICO's guidance, and the ICO's current guidance is you should do a reasonable and proportionate search. And it's very hard to tease out in a webinar what that means. What I would say is my experience over the years with the ICO has been that if you can robustly, and I wouldn't be afraid to be robust, if you can robustly defend the searches that you have done, and throughout all of it, deal with the DSAR, deal with the complaint, move them on. Don't be afraid of the ICO here. The ICO are most of the time going to go back and do a bit more. And they will even resile from that finding if you go back robustly and go, actually, here's everything we've done. But so it is difficult, and it very much is going to depend on your organization, the technology you use, your ability to find things. We have a whole range of different systems and tools that aren't integrated with one another. So if your internal chat isn't integrated with your email, then all of a sudden you're doing two searches. And that's just two tools off the top of my head. Be prepared to think about the end point of every DSAR when you're doing it. This is going to potentially go to the ICO. You are your regulator. Are you happy to defend yourself to the ICO? And I think if you start to approach particularly the difficult ones like that, you will not go too far wrong, because you'll always go a wee bit further than what you think you should have done. We had one in one place where I worked where we had somebody who was a prolific filmer of themselves, and that wasn't always appropriate filming of themselves. And they used their work systems as their place of storage. And then they made a subject access request.
Yeah.
And how far do we go with that? What is reasonable? What is proportionate? So we went pretty far. We thought, well, what's reasonable? And then we took another step. And we thought, yes, if the ICO come now, we're going to look pretty damn good here. So I would say your starting point is to think about not just the systems, but where you're going to end up, where this is going to end up. Be robust with the requester, move them through your processes quickly and efficiently, and get them to the ICO, because then they're not your problem anymore. They're the ICO.
True.
Or sorry, the IC's problem. Because they have to.
I keep saying ICO.
Yeah.
Simply done, isn't it? Thank you, Stephen. That's great. Thank you. So we're actually going to move away from talking about viewer now, because we've got some other areas that we need to touch on too. We've had some questions actually around the DPO role, and I'd like to ask Sofia about this one, your thoughts, which is what differences do you see between the official tasks and duties of a DPO as set out under the GDPR, and indeed the UK GDPR as well, and the shape of the DPO role in real life, in terms of the potential challenges around conflicts of interest and things like that. What do you see as kind of the main challenges in the DPO role?
Well, I think we can all agree that if you have a DPO role, it's rarely just a DPO role. And I think because of the background that a lot of DPOs bring, the varied background, you could probably fit other things in the role. You could do, IT security, audits, contracts, AI. And I think because DPOs are generally helpful, all of this will get lumped into compliance. So the DPO will do, very different things, which obviously, on the one hand, could be the very obvious challenge of conflict of interest, depending on what the additional job description is. So I think it's a hard one to deal with, because I think as a DPO you should say, I think there's a conflict of interest here, and then you let the business accept it or reject it, whatever they feel like. But then if you are doing different things as a DPO, because it's general compliance, then you might be spread too thinly and spinning too many plates. So are you actually doing the things that the DPO should be doing according to the GDPR? It's a hard balance to manage. You don't want to get into performance issues. So you almost need to communicate all the time and manage expectations of people to say what's a priority, what isn't. And then if they say something else is a priority, then you need to communicate that as well and say, well, the DPO job won't get done, and that means X, Y, and Z. So it's also a practical question if there's just not enough hands on deck, if it's, if the DPO is doing a lot of different things, if you have 50 SARs a week, I saw someone say 60 SARs a month or something, and then general compliance, and on top of that you're also helping with an IT audit, then where do you start? It's just it's very easy for the DPO role to evolve into I think AI governance these days. I see a lot of roles that are combined data protection, information security, or data protection and AI, and it's fine. Well, I guess it's probably fine to do that, but the role needs to be very well clarified. The responsibilities need to be clarified, and you need, I think as a person doing it, you need to know what's important and what isn't to the business, because otherwise you just get lost and nothing will get done. That was a bit pessimistic at the end, but
That's okay. Thank you. That's great. We've got just about 10 minutes left, everyone. So I might just have to decide which questions we pick within the time that we've got available. So I'm going to move on to actually regulatory action, because that's something that we did say that we would cover today. So I'd like to ask, first of all, Stephen, your thoughts on the recent ICO fines, actually, that we've seen for Reddit and for Media Lab, which were around, failure to protect children's data.
I think these fines show that the ICO takes age-appropriate design code very seriously. I think the big message is it doesn't matter if your organization is not providing services for children or not, particularly if you're saying our organization definitely isn't providing services for children, then the ICO is going to expect you to make sure children are not using your services or people under a certain age. And it is encouraging to see the ICO start to take on this kind of enforcement action, which isn't just marketing and breaches.
Okay, that's useful. Thank you. And I think if we can just touch on we've obviously had quite a few questions around AI as well. So just while we have the chance to touch on that, around how organizations are approaching kind of AI risks and their compliance, the related compliance challenges. Robert, is that something you could talk about a little bit for the audience, please?
Yes. I think every organization needs to be aware that it is being touched by AI. We have it in transcripts from Teams meetings and that sort of thing, where the business is completely unaware that this is happening. I think it sits very parallel to data protection. It's as Sofia says, it's a DPO role will get you into advising on AI, and it is not a pure technical issue. It is everything else around human rights, human dignity. We see that in terms of protecting the human fundamental rights of individual, particularly children, the ICO should be getting involved. And I think, therefore, we need to have an AI risk assessment as a standard practice within the business. We need to be agreeing on what commercial clauses we should have in contracts with third parties that we are working with. We need to think about where the data is going, how on earth we would manage data subject rights if we're the controller but the data is no longer with us. And then there's the breach of intellectual property and confidentiality and all sorts of risks there where, we need to be thinking very carefully about what we say in our terms of business, in our privacy notice, but also how we, using Stephen's word, robustly, how we robustly look a regulator in the face if something goes wrong and show that we were taking the matter seriously, that we'd done appropriate assessments, that we have insurance that covers our risks as well.
That's great. Thank you very much. That's a very, very nice, comprehensive answer, Robert. And there's lots of things for us to consider, both in the worlds of, the worlds of AI, but also, touching on lots of the data protection principles there and how they interact. So I'm just going to, we've just got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to come to the last question, if that's okay for everyone, which is around kind of looking ahead to what would be the areas that you would think as being the kind of key risks or upcoming developments that you're kind of expecting in the year ahead, let's say. So Stephen, maybe if you'd like to go first, and so this is our last question, so we'll just try and get everything in time.
Yeah, I think while a lot of the noise within the data protection community has been about, are you ready for the Data Use and Access Act? A lot of the debate outside of it is, oh God, data protection law isn't as important anymore. It's being softened, it's being thrown out the window. And particularly marketing teams, which is where you get questions like, if somebody sends you an email, does that mean they consent to marketing, are starting to come from. And I know that a lot of my peers are coming under quite a bit of pressure as a result of that. I think people thinking, well, we don't need consent for email anymore. We can always rely on legitimate interest, that kind of thing. And I think we need to be mindful that a lot of the arguments that we've won within our organizations through the development of GDPR, it coming into law and then implementing it, are going to need to be had again, because what we're hearing within the data protection community and what the rest of UK PLC are hearing are two quite different messages.
So, thank you very much. Great. Sofia?
Yes, for me, I think it'll be making sure that whatever you're doing embeds data protection by design and default, because we're going to have AI wanting data, we're going to have other people wanting to use AI, so you almost have to make sure that whatever you do, you've thought about, I'll say generally, privacy by design and by default, and things like AI assessments, TPIAs, explainability, that ties in nicely with this, because at the end of the day, if we say that the Information Commissioner, I said it right this time, doesn't regulate as much as they should, as they don't do as much as they should, then you have to ask yourself, why are you compliant? If there are no fines to scare you, then what is it that you care about the business that you don't want to get damaged? And that's your why. If you don't have the why, I think as a DPO you'll struggle, and senior leaders will struggle to work with you, and it's just a bit of a mismatch.
That's an interesting point as well, thinking of it from that angle of what's important from the point of view of your values and your organisation and your things like that. That's good. And Robert, would you like to add some final thoughts on that before we close?
Yes, so I think we need to make sure that our policies and procedures are up to date, are realistic, and we need to make sure that our staff across the business understand what good looks like and what bad looks like. We are going to continue to have cyber risks. We do not want to lose control of the thing that we believe is valuable, i.e. data, and individuals know is valuable too.
That's wonderful. Thank you. There's been some wonderful kind of comments and advice and everything. So thanks. I'd just like to say a big thank you at the end to all of our panel members, to Sofia, to Robert, and to Stephen. So thanks very much to you all. And a big thank you to our audience as well, and everyone that's popped in some questions as well, either in advance or on that. It's been really interesting seeing the chat today. Thank you all very much. Phil's had a couple of links on there for you as well, telling you where the video will be tomorrow. But equally, we're going to be posting an email out just to remind, I think somebody asked a question about this. Yes, there will be, the recording will be available at about 4 p.m. UK time tomorrow. And in addition, there's a link, I think, just been added to the chat as well with our article all as well about Dewar that has got more reference points for you if that will be helpful. So finally now, I'd just like to say a big thank you and goodbye for today. Take care.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye.